One man conquered more land in 20 years than any ruler before him, and he did it without destroying everything in his path. This is how the Persians built the first true empire and changed the rules of conquest forever. Picture this. It is the year 550 before the Common Era, and a Persian prince named Cyrus is about to do something unprecedented. He is not just going to win battles. He is going to invent a completely new way to rule the world. The empires before him, like the Assyrians and Babylonians, conquered through terror and brutality. They burned cities and enslaved entire populations, and forced everyone to worship their gods. Cyrus watched all this and realized something brilliant. Fear might win you territory, but it cannot hold an empire together. So he tried something radical. He conquered with mercy. When Cyrus overthrew the Median Empire, his first major victory, he did not execute the Median king. He married into the Median royal family and incorporated their nobles into his government. This was unheard of. Conquered peoples were supposed to be humiliated and subjugated, not given positions of power. But Cyrus understood that respect earns loyalty, and loyalty is more valuable than fear. His army grew stronger because defeated soldiers often joined him rather than fought to the death. His reputation spread like wildfire. Here was a conqueror who let you keep your culture and your religion and your dignity.
The conquest of Babylon in 539 showed the world exactly what made Cyrus different. Babylon was the greatest city on earth, with walls so massive that armies had tried and failed for generations to breach them. Cyrus studied the problem and found an ingenious solution. The Euphrates River ran directly through the city, so he diverted the entire river upstream. His soldiers walked into Babylon through the dry riverbed under the walls while the Babylonians were celebrating a religious festival. It was a masterstroke of strategy over brute force. But what happened next was even more revolutionary. Instead of sacking the city, Cyrus issued a decree that changed history. He announced that all peoples enslaved by the Babylonians were free to return to their homelands. The Jews, who had been captive for decades, could go back to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. He returned the sacred objects that previous conquerors had stolen. He proclaimed that everyone in his empire could worship whatever gods they chose. This decree was inscribed on a clay cylinder that many scholars call the first declaration of human rights. Whether or not that label is accurate, the impact was undeniable. People across the ancient world started to see Persian rule not as oppression, but as liberation. Cyrus built an empire that stretched from the Mediterranean to Central Asia, but he knew conquest was only the beginning. The real challenge was holding it all together. That is where his successor, Darius the Great, came in. Darius took the throne in 522 and immediately faced rebellions across the empire.
19 different regions tried to break away. Darius crushed every single uprising within a year, and then he did something even more impressive. He built a system so efficient that the Persian Empire would last for 2 more centuries. Darius divided the empire into provinces called satrapies. Each satrapy had a governor called a satrap who collected taxes and maintained order. But here is the genius part. Darius did not just trust the satraps, he created a network of inspectors called the eyes and ears of the king who traveled in secret to make sure governors were not becoming too powerful or corrupt. It was an early system of checks and balances that prevented any one region from breaking away. The satraps had authority, but they knew they were being watched. Communication was the lifeblood of this massive empire. Darius constructed the Royal Road, a highway stretching over 1,500 miles from Sardis in modern Turkey to Susa in modern Iran. Regular roads were dangerous and slow, but the Royal Road had stations every 14 miles with fresh horses and riders. A message that would take months for a normal traveler could be delivered by the royal couriers in just 7 days. This postal system, called the Puridazish, inspired what would eventually become postal services around the world, including the United States Postal Service. The motto carved above post offices today about neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night staying these couriers
comes from the Greek historian Herodotus, describing Persian messengers. The economy needed unity too. Darius introduced a standardized currency called the daric, made of gold and silver. Before this, every region used different coins and exchange rates, which made trade chaotic. With the daric, merchants could do business from Egypt to India using the same money. Darius also standardized weights and measures, so a pound in Babylon meant the same thing as a pound in Bactria. These reforms sound boring, but they were revolutionary. They turned a collection of conquered territories into an actual functioning empire with a single economic system. The Persian military was the most sophisticated fighting force the world had ever seen. At its core were the Immortals, an elite unit of 10,000 soldiers who served as the king's personal guard and shock troops. They were called Immortals because their numbers never changed. If one soldier died or was too injured to fight, he was immediately replaced, so the unit always remained at exactly 10,000. They wore elaborate armor and carried spears and bows and wicker shields. The Immortals were not just warriors, they were a symbol. Seeing them on the battlefield told enemies that the full might of Persia had arrived. But the Persian army was not just about elite units. Cyrus and Darius understood combined arms warfare. They used cavalry to flank enemies while archers rained arrows from a distance, and then heavy infantry moved in for close combat. They employed siege weapons and engineers who could redirect rivers or build massive ramps to breach city walls. Persian generals studied their enemies and adapted tactics, rather than just relying on overwhelming force. This flexibility made them nearly unstoppable for decades.
The Persians also innovated in logistics, which sounds dull, but won wars. Armies need food and water and equipment. The royal road was not just for messages, it moved supplies. Persians built caravanserais, which were fortified rest stations where merchants and soldiers could resupply. They dug underground irrigation channels called qanats to bring water to arid regions, which supported agriculture and sustained armies on the move. While other empires struggled to feed their troops in hostile territory, the Persians had supply lines that kept their forces strong. What truly set the Persian Empire apart was its tolerance. In a world where conquerors usually imposed their culture and religion on everyone, Persia did the opposite. Local leaders kept their positions as long as they paid taxes and maintained order. People spoke their own languages. They worshipped their own gods. The Persians even funded the rebuilding of temples for religions they did not practice themselves. This was not altruism. It was strategy. When people felt respected, they did not rebel. When they kept their identities, they had less reason to resist Persian rule. Tolerance was a weapon more powerful than any sword. The empire also thrived on cultural exchange. Persian kings employed Greek sculptors and Egyptian architects and Babylonian astronomers. Ideas and technologies flowed along the trade routes that connected the empire. The Persians adopted the best innovations from every culture they encountered and spread them throughout their territories. This cross-pollination of knowledge made the Persian Empire a center of learning and advancement. It was not just militarily dominant, it was culturally sophisticated.
But empires are fragile. The Persian Empire eventually fell to Alexander the Great in 330 BCE, but not because its system was weak. Alexander conquered Persia because he inherited the military innovations of his father Philip, and because he was one of the greatest tactical geniuses in history. Even then, he did not dismantle the Persian system. He kept the satrapies and the roads and the bureaucracy because they worked. He even adopted Persian customs and married a Persian princess. In many ways, Alexander became a Persian king who happened to be Macedonian. The legacy of the Persian Empire echoes through history. The idea that an empire could be multicultural and tolerant influenced Rome and later the Islamic caliphates and eventually modern nation-states. The administrative systems Darius created became blueprints for how to govern large territories. The infrastructure, like roads and postal systems, set standards that lasted millennia. Even the concept of standardized currency, which we take for granted today, started with Darius. Cyrus and Darius proved that you could build something greater than a collection of conquered cities. You could create a civilization that unified different peoples under a single system while still respecting their differences. The Persian Empire was not perfect. It still relied on military might, and there were still rebellions and wars. But it represented a fundamentally different approach to power. It showed that empires built on respect and efficiency could be more enduring than empires built on terror.
This is the story of how two visionary leaders took a small kingdom in modern Iran and turned it into the first superpower. They conquered from Egypt to India, not just with armies, but with ideas about governance and tolerance and administration. They built roads and postal systems and a standardized economy. They created a military that combined elite forces with flexible tactics. Most importantly, they proved that strength did not have to mean cruelty and that conquest did not have to mean destruction. The Persians built the first great empire by rewriting the rules of what an empire could be, and the world has never been the same.